Welcome to another episode of Too Late with Dave. This week I'm with Russ O'Connell, picture editor of the Sunday Times magazine and veteran of the photography world.
Hey mate.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So these are always a bit weird now. I always say this because we've known each other a long time and I probably know far more than you would want me to know. But let's talk about how you got into picture editing, photo world. As I recall, I think I met you. You were at Heat, or had been at Heat.
Yeah.
And moved to Q, Heat magazine.
Yeah. That's kind of where I started back in like early 2000s. Because I did photography at university, but didn't actually want to be a photographer, and found myself at university enjoying looking at other people's work than my own. So that kind of headed me down the path of picture editing, I suppose. But the thing is that when I was at university, I didn't know that my job existed.
Right.
We weren't taught that there, I'd heard of art directors, but I hadn't heard of picture editors. So when I came out of uni, I kind of applied to loads of different magazines and photo agencies just to get some kind of experience. And then ended up on the photo desk at Heat magazine back in the day, kind of when it was quite prolific.
So Heat was like selling ridiculous amounts.
Yeah, it was.
Was it weekly or two?
It was weekly,
Yeah.
so it was kind of a cultural phenomenon in that sense. And it was just around the time that Big Brother started, so there was heavy kind of focus on that, and consequently the whole kind of celebrity thing really kind of blew up.
And so, kind of day to day or week to week, just the volume of pictures you must have been seeing.
Yeah.
Was everything digital, or was it still?
No. Some of it was, but a lot, like really large percentage of stuff was print. So you'll get prints in from all of the agencies, like big packs of prints, and you'd have to kind of go through them, work out, for the fashion pages, what pictures would work for that, what pictures would work for the kind of the news stories and the exclusives and everything. And photography, like photographic wise, for the shoots, a lot of stuff was still shot on film, so you kind of have to edit through the film stuff. And then there was a slow transition, so this was kind of early 2000s, a slow transition into digital kind of photography. It slowly kind of came in when emails could hack, larger file sizes and stuff.
And how much of the work was commissioned, and how much were you just being sent stuff unsolicited, or PAP stuff?
Because the nature of the magazine, it was majority of it was paparazzi stuff. We did do kind of 1 or 2 shoots a week, conceptual shoots with a celebrity, which is kind of the main Heat interview. So that was coming up with a concept, commissioning a photographer, commissioning set design, build, studio, basically producing a whole shoot every week with a different person. But then on the other side of it, it was kind of hard paparazzi, hard kind of news stuff.
And like with the cover, for example, would that have been paparazzi?
Yeah, 99% of the time, yeah.
And would you be competing with like other dailies and tabloids?
Yeah, so back then there were two kind of sides of it. There was the newspapers would always get kind of first dibs on the big exclusives, and then it would go to second rights, which were kind of magazine rights, and then you'll be bidding against other celebrity magazines like Hello magazine, Now magazine, and that, to get those exclusive sets for the mag. And sometimes it was ridiculous money. So if you were a kind of paparazzi photographer back then, you could make a good living.
I remember a photographer telling me that he got £15,000 for a set of pictures that he'd taken on a film set or out of a window of a film set. He'd been paid £15,000 not to give them to another paper.
Yeah.
And no one published them.
Yeah, there was all that going on. I think the most I spent was like 40 grand, something like that. I think that was like Beckham in his pants on a balcony at the Euros or something like that. And bear in mind, that was that was after the newspapers had run it. Yeah. So whoever took that picture, was kind of made for the year.
And does that kind of thing happen anymore? I mean, is there a feeding frenzy for paparazzi pictures in the way that there used to be?
I don't know. I'm kind of out of that game now. I don't suppose so. What I did notice throughout my time there is that the volume of photographers was increasing. So before you'd kind of have the one or two kind of sneaky paparazzis in a bush taking a photo, or get tip off that someone's coming out of a nightclub or whatever, and they'll be down there. And then it turned into a pack mentality. So whereas before there might be a handful of people, there was 30, 40 people kind of outside trying to get the same thing, just because the demand for it was massive back then.
And you think now everyone's got a phone, so...
Yeah, I can imagine now it's just, and they wouldn't get paid kind of half as much because it's not exclusive, because there's so many people there taking the same picture, getting the same thing. But then that's when it turned into, so they used to have kind of be in cahoots with the celebrities. Yeah. So they get a cut of the fee. So, you'd have so-and-so, even down to the point of they'd make sure that, like one of the kind of female celebrities, they'd say, well, maybe you can put on a bit of weight and we do a shoot of you kind of on the beach, and then sell that so the magazines or papers can slag you off for being fat or overweight, and then lose the weight, and then we do another shoot with you. Amazing. And then they can come back and say, oh, amazing transformation, what's that? So there was a lot of setups between celebrities and the photographers or photo agencies kind of back then. But as Joe Public, you wouldn't really know that.
And so were you relieved to get out of that and move on to... Yeah,
it kind of got to a point where I just wasn't interested in the whole celebrity side of that, kind of celebrity side of that. I couldn't get excited about.
Did the actual photography take sort of second place to the content?
To a certain extent, yeah. And my passion actually laid in the shoots that we did every week, the kind of set up, produced shoots, which is kind of why I decided, this isn't for me. I wanted to move on and kind of expand and grow in that sense and learn, which is kind of how I ended up at Q.
At Q, so this is just a small, we're looking at a grid of Q covers, which is a tiny proportion of what you worked on.
I mean, this is just one project. So this is for the 25th anniversary. So kind of, I can't remember how far into my career there, but this was just one of the kind of projects that I had to do. So I had to commission and produce 25 shoots basically for the cover. So we did 25 separate kind of covers, all of the same issue. But yeah, that was kind of a monstrous task.
Also, this is kind of, I don't know if golden age is the right thing, but this is at a time when a magazine would splash out on doing 25 shoots for this special occasion.
Yeah. And the record labels and everyone were kind of invested in it. So they would, have no qualms about flying the photographer and myself out to LA or New York or whatever to art direct the shoot and to do the shoot. And
how important do you feel it was for you to be there? As like when you left Q, you were irreplaceable and I filled in for a while, but I found myself going on shoots partly as a buffer between the photographer, the artist, and
publicist,
the army of people who were there to say no to everything. But to kind of a little bit of art direction as well, but to also just make it happen smoothly.
Yeah, I mean, essentially you're there, as you say, as kind of that middle person, but also to art direct. But because you've produced the shoot, you need to be there to make sure that everyone's there on time, and also that you're getting exactly what you want and what the art director needs from it, and to kind of create that buffer, as you say, between artists.
Well, if a photographer says, "Can you jump?" and they don't, that kind of changes the vibe. Whereas you act the clown.
Exactly. Yeah. And the trick, I can come on to it later, but the trick of a lot of stuff is that you just spring it upon them when you're there, because invariably 9 times out of 10, if you put an idea forward, the publicist would knock it down. Yeah. Without even speaking to the talent.
I mean, I found that most, particularly with sort of the men and the older men, rock stars, they just want to look cool, but they don't want to say that. Yeah. So there's all these tricky restrictions imposed about distance or light.
Yeah, the kind of vanity kicks in.
Yeah, but if you just say, I'm worried about my gut, well, we're not going to show it.
Yeah, precisely.
Job done.
Yeah.
But
they're all human.
Of those 25, was there one that was stuck out as memorable in a good or a bad way?
I mean, some of them actually were done off the back of other shoots or in other situations.
So they weren't specifically just that shot. You were doing another shoot. And
yeah, some of them were.
Yeah.
So some of them were on the back of other cover shoots for other issues or awards or events that kind of happened, and then I had to think on the back of that. Right, I need to get this because X months down the line, I've got this big project coming up, so I need to see that. I don't know if there's one that kind of absolutely stands out story.
Were you just relieved to get them done?
Yeah, it was a big undertaking.
And was the brief all just straight to camera?
We wanted them fairly clean.
Yeah,
wanted them fairly clean. But then supplementary inside, there would be kind of alternative shots from each of those kind of artist shoots, and there'd be environmental stuff. Or just a different image.
So back then, typically an issue. How many shoots were you doing per issue?
A lot of the magazine was shoots.
Yeah.
So probably, I'd say at least 60% of the magazine was
a lot of work.
Shot. Yeah. But I suppose with a monthly, you've got that luxury of time in a sense to put that together. Whereas on the weekly, it's a lot faster.
See, I've found by the end of my time there, everyone's lead time was less. So like we were getting a day or 2 days notice about a shoot.
Then that's
sometimes the cover was being shot in the week it was going to print. It was quite hairy, and then other times it would be far ahead. But I think this kind of everything's instant now, so people had got used to not having to think too far ahead.
That's the way of the world, though.
We've got a shot here of Lady Gaga, and I don't know if it's completely evident in this on screen here, but she's got a bigger cock than both of us, I believe.
Speak for yourself, Dave. Yeah, that is a memorable one, to say the least.
Whose idea was that?
That was hers, actually.
Amazing.
Because it was completely not what we went there to try and achieve. So I had a whole kind of different concept about how we wanted to do her for that shoot, which we put to publicists, and as far as we knew, everything was kind of fine and dandy to go ahead. And
who shot it?
So that was John Wright shot that, and turned up at the studio on the day. She was about 3 hours late, I think, something like that.
So early, technically early.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So everyone's kind of sitting around waiting. She finally comes in a Inspector Gadget Mac, completely naked underneath. And kind of before we even did anything, she was like, let's have lunch. So we sat down, very nice kind of, personal.
Was it here or?
Chat. Yeah, it was here in London, Spring Studios in Camden. And had the chat, and then she went off into, after having lunch, she's like, right, let's have a creative meeting. And I noticed throughout kind of lunch, all these random people were kind of turning up, which turned out to be her creative team that she kind of
Her dick dealer.
Yeah. And so we sat down, and she's like, right, I've had to think about your idea and I like it, but what I want to do is this. And with that, this is no lie, she pulled out a black strap-on dildo and whacked it on the table. Much to my surprise, having never seen a black strap-on dildo, I was like, okay, and your reason is? And I mean, hats off to her. She was like, there's so much being said about me at the media. Am I hermaphrodite? Am I a man or am I a woman or that? So I really want to play on that and pose on the cover with this massive strap-on. And I looked at the art director at the time and John, the photographer, and we were like, and kind of said to her, I kind of get where you're coming from, but we can't put that on the front cover of the magazine and sell it in Tesco's. So the compromise was that she was going to shove it down her trousers, and with subtle lighting, it wouldn't be the first thing you see, but then you'll kind of see it there. So yeah, so that's how we got to that stage.
And what was the reaction when it hit the shelves?
I mean, it was quite a furore around it. You know, not only on the fact that she's kind of half naked in the first sense, but yeah, it was a big statement piece, to say the least.
Another concept here, BDI.
Yeah, so this was one of the kind of surprising things. I put forward this idea to shoot them on the moon.
Did you just want a holiday?
Because they had kind of because they conquered, you know, the UK. So let's have them on the moon. And I didn't think for 1 minute Liam would be into it, but to my surprise, they were completely game and up for it. So it was obviously a bit of a comp job in the sense that there was only managed to get hold of one realistic kind of NASA spacesuit, which we had to shoot them separately, kind of in turns, and then comp it together. But the photographer Steve Neves had a brilliant set designer who actually built the whole of the moon surface, and it was fantastic. So he had put all this kind of gravel down earth, painted it all, the fake kind of moon rocks and everything like that.
Looks great.
Yeah, it was really, really good. The only thing about it, which I still don't understand, is apparently the flag's upside down, but it's one of those things.
Maybe it was meant to be upside down.
Yeah, well, precisely, yeah. That's just a behind-the-scenes pic I took of Liam.
And so, I mean, what I like about this is whatever you think about the end result of the thing, that getting a band or someone of his stature at the time to take the time to put in the effort and work with you and the photographer and the magazine to do something
I think
memorable.
the gravitas of the magazine at the time kind of helped cement that we weren't trying to, you know, dick him over and make him look stupid in it. So he was, as I say, hats off to him. He was invested in it completely and was up for doing it, and it all worked out in the end.
Yeah, I mean, he was great. We did a couple more shoots with him, one with Alex Lake and one with Andrew Whitten, and he was just fantastic. I've never laughed so much.
I used to think he was a complete dick, and when I actually met him, you know, he was the opposite. He's very dry sense of humour, very witty, very quick.
Yeah, he was great. He was 2 weeks late, but definitely worth it. And we just laughed. We were supposed to have him for 45 minutes. I think we had him 4 hours or something.
Once he's kind of relaxed, invested, knows that, you know, you've got good intentions, then he plays ball. You know.
The tricky group shot.
Yeah, so this is one that nearly killed me as well.
So there's everyone is in this, from Amy Winehouse to
Rihanna to so we've got Amy Winehouse, McCartney.
Did they all get on?
Foo Fighters. Oh yeah. All shared a dressing room. Yeah. That was it was called Artists of the Century. So it was kind of the most prolific artist, you know, that I think it came out around 2010, that decade so far in 2000s. It had its kind of own headaches in the sense that the idea was to create this massive group shot, a bit, you know, Sgt. Pepper's, you know, influence. But in order to kind of do it and make it look semi-realistic, I mean, you can, you know, from a art director's point of view or photographer's point of view, you can tell that it's not all shot in the same. But for Joe Bloggs, you know, they just see the image as is. So it involved the photographer working out the distance between subject and the camera, locking it off, lighting diagram, so he made sure that the lighting was, you know, exact. And so pretty much had a portable setup that you could take anywhere. So it was shot in New York, LA, London, kind of all over
photographers.
No, all one photographer. Right. So John Wright shot that for me as well. I think I nearly broke him doing that. But again, it was off the back of other cover shoots, awards, loads of different scenarios. I think he went back to New York about 3 or 4 times to do it. I popped over to various different places.
Anyone you didn't get?
Probably, yeah. I can't think of the top of my head. But it was a really good experience to be thrown right in at the deep end and have these kind of big projects where you're producing so many shoots at the same time, spinning so many plates, and just kind of relying. It's good to have a photographer that you can rely on, that you know is invested in the shoot and the ultimate project, and to just rely on them, because I couldn't have been at every single one of those shoots.
Now, how mapped out was this, or was it just to get all those people?
It was just get all those people. So if you put them on the level plane of focus, they would all be, it would all look kind of true, but this was on a gatefold, but you'd need kind of 15 pages of the gatefold to see them kind of all in one. So the art director, Ian, kind of worked through and, placed people in various different areas, and some of them kind of like right at the last minute drop-ins and additions. So you had to just work with what you had, really. But it wasn't kind of pre-sketched out in terms of, have Amy on the right and Rihanna, Amy on the left and Rihanna on the right. It was kind of quite free-flowing.
Well done.
Thank you.
And then after, how many years were you at Q?
Probably about 7, I think, something like that. And then after Q, I was friends with James Mullinger, who was the photographic director at GQ.
Legendary comedian.
Yeah, now he is. Yeah, proper career in Canada. And he had left GQ to pursue his kind of comedy career over in Canada, and gave me a heads up that he was leaving. So kind of went over and had interviews and got a job there. And for me, it was kind of a step up in terms of subject matter and kind of direction in shoot producing and photography, where I kind of wanted to go. Q was brilliant and it was fantastic, but it was very kind of specific. You're always shooting musicians 99% of the time, whereas GQ had a lot of musicians, actors, politicians, and that. So I really wanted to kind of broaden out, the remit of work that I was doing and commissioning.
Did you find like how you approach working with an actor or a writer or a painter or non-musician? Did you approach it differently, or the people around them different?
The people around them were different. Yeah. I mean, obviously, the bigger they are, status-wise, the bigger the celebrity, the kind of the more fanfare there is around them. But then on the flip side of that, some of them are quite kind of down to earth. So Brian, there was quite a big entourage for that, but that had its own kind of issues in the sense of essentially GQ was a fashion magazine, like a men's fashion magazine. So it had to kind of be on brand in terms of what were the kind of main fashion sponsors for the issue, the main brands that the magazine kind of works with.
Does that dilute the photography a little bit?
Yeah, well, to me it did. I mean, even though it's a nice cover, that to me that wasn't the strongest image. There was another image that was actually supposed to be the cover, but at the last minute it worked out that he wasn't wearing kind of one of the main labels that advertise in the magazine, so it had to be swapped out to accommodate that. And from my perspective, I understand the cogs of how it works, but that's not kind of pictured.
And did that happen a lot?
Yeah. I mean, with the GQ Awards back then, everyone had to be shot in Hugo Boss because Hugo Boss was the main sponsor of the GQ Awards. So, and one of the main advertisers. So you had to shoot everyone in a Hugo Boss tux. And that is a lot of the way that the fashion world works. The advertisers, you have to kind of give precedence to the advertisers, show their clothes. But for me, visually, it's about the image at the end of the day. It's about the strongest image.
And so, on a shoot like this, once you get it back to the office and you're going through it with art director and whoever else, editor and whoever's involved, how much influence would you have over what was chosen?
From this, not much at all, because the art director at the time kind of had a very strong aesthetic and opinion.
But were you working towards that?
I mean, that was kind of, that was kind of the main. We knew that, it had to be wearing a suit, it had to be,
I remember
visible within it.
going back to James Mullinger, he called me up, and I was working at Mojo, and he said they were doing some music section. Could I come and help? So I go there for a week, and then he hired me back for another week to cover for his assistant was off, and they were doing a thing on, it was Wimbledon, they were doing a piece on women's tennis.
Right.
So he said, just get a load of stuff. So I do a sort of Mojo-esque deep dive. I've got like the furore over where a woman showed her ankles, and there was the first female umpire, and there was all this like history of Wimbledon women. And I spent 5 days doing it, and I've got it all laid out. He comes over, and he went, "Yeah, very nice, but I've got a picture of Anna Kournikova bending over, picking up a ball." I was
showing her knickers. Yeah.
Job done.
Brilliant. Yeah. That's very much what it was like.
But she had a watch.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, probably one of the main advertisers in the issue. There you go. Yeah, which had Calvin Klein pants on.
But it's funny what goes into, what people see on the cover or in a magazine.
Yeah.
And I know this was very true of Q and Mojo, music magazines, where they think, "Oh, it's cool, you're hanging out with rock stars," but sometimes you've got a minute, or or you've got an agreed concept, and then
that gets
the
thrown
artist
out
turns up
minute.
with a strap on, throws it out
exactly,
the window.
Yeah. But and a lot of stuff you're kind of reliant on, or you choose a photographer because of the way that the style that they shoot, and their kind of legacy and their portfolios. This Kit Harington, who we shot, actually, this was I commissioned Peggy Sorota to do this out in LA, and we shot at her house. So I was kind of scrambling around looking for locations to shoot, and Peggy offered up her place. She's got like kind of a little studio out the back of where she was living in LA. And then we did some stuff out in the grounds and the gardens around. She's got, a bit of a ranch kind of out there. But this was kind of a flip side of a lot of the production that goes into things. Kit pretty much kind of turned up on his own and was just hanging out, and we had most of the day with him to shoot, and Peggy could just do her thing, which was brilliant. There wasn't kind of any predetermined setup and look that we were after for it, and often that's the best way to go around a shoot, because you can be so specific, and kind of narrow it down to a T, and then you get there on the day, and by someone saying no, can throw the whole concept out the window, and then you're stuck. But if you've got faith in the photographer and know what they're capable of, then you don't really have to worry, because you're going to walk away with something great.
Yeah, I mean, quite often I'd turn up at a shoot, and I know that I've been told they've already got a headline. So you've got to get a picture that matches the witty headline, and it's just they're not going to leap in the air.
Yeah,
some 50-year-old bloke.
Exactly. Yeah, and sometimes it can help, but then sometimes, the image can create the headline.
Yeah.
Yeah, which, as you say, if you go into a shoot with a predetermined headline or strapline that you're just not going to get, then it's game over from the start.
Yeah. This is fantastic.
Yeah, so this is brilliant. So
we have to describe this for the people that are listening.
Okay.
I'll leave it to you to describe.
So this is a feature that we did on the kind of the Great British Summer, which involved kind of the main kind of British activities from the year, from Ascot to the boat race to polo, and we kind of wanted to see the kind of demographic variety of kind of the UK. So I commissioned Peter Dench to shoot this, just because he's one of the, in my view, he's kind of one of the best social documentary kind of photographers out there.
Great.
And it's just a classic expose of British culture and kind of where we are. This is, I think it's at Ascot or something. And I mean, the picture says it all. It's absolutely brilliant. And again, you can't go to somewhere like this with a predetermined number of images that you want to get and ideas about the images that you want to get. You just got to have trust in the photographer to be able to go there and just bring back some gold.
Yeah, and that's perfect with the headline and everything.
Yeah.
It really works.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's a whole series of these
Yeah, I mean, there's so many great images from that shoot. See the next one. Yeah, I mean,
Yes.
as a tableau, there's so much going on in that picture. It's absolutely brilliant. Yeah, everything from the two mums kissing to piggyback going on. There's like a bride in the background. It's just absolutely brilliant.
It's like they've had a...
But you can't make that up.
Yeah.
That happens, and that's about the photographer's eye. It's about choosing the right photographer that has that kind of intuition and can see things happening even before it happens.
Great.
So this is Polly Alderton, and throughout COVID, as a photographer, a lot of photographers really struggled, because a lot of magazines weren't commissioning, obviously for obvious reasons. A lot of newspapers weren't commissioning.
Yeah, how did the magazine work through that period?
So luckily enough, this for Sunday Times. So lucky enough, we had kind of a backlog of features that we could kind of dig into and run. So we still had some shoots that were done that we could publish, but I came across her work on Instagram. She was posting stuff on Instagram about her kind of, almost like a lockdown diary about her life at home because she couldn't get out and shoot. And it was just a brilliant commentary on what everyone was experiencing at anyone who's got kids and that was kind of experiencing at home, just embracing the everyday, kind of the new normal, as it were, and just a real strong social documentary.
And was this published during lockdown, or did this come out after?
I think it was just after, or just as we were kind of coming out and back in.
Were you getting lots of people sending in stuff?
Yeah, and
fairly generic.
Very generic, but I suppose people weren't kind of talking to each other or seeing anyone else's work. So you get 10 projects of someone taking, portraits of their neighbours outside their front door, all looking the same. Yeah, exactly, with a mask on, right? 2 meters away. So it's people like Polly that really kind of broke the mould of that for me, and actually gave an insight into what a lot of people were experiencing at the time. There was another amazing photographer, Kieran Doherty, who did a lovely piece on his elderly parents at home. I don't think I've got it here, but he was kind of shielding with his parents, and he had an old Leica, we had a laugh about that earlier, a really old kind of Barnett camera, and was photographing his elderly parents and their experience during lockdown. They couldn't kind of see the rest of their family, so it was just a beautiful love letter to his parents and the relationship between them. And it's just lovely to see someone doing something different, but completely from the heart and completely self-processed.
And a lot of photographers, like you say, were really kind of hit hard around this time, as was the whole sort of photography world and publishing and stuff like that. And do you notice any sort of major changes afterwards, how people are working or approaching work or looking for work even?
It definitely created a cull, I think, in a number of photographers. Sadly, a number of photographers, didn't carry on because they couldn't, and gave up the game completely. Budgetarily, if that's even a word, I think it kind of hit a lot of people. Their budgets were stripped back, so people weren't kind of working for the same that they were beforehand. I do think the whole industry changed.
And do you think, sort of on a slight tangent, but often they'll see, like on BBC website, something happens and they'll say, send us your pictures of how you were affected by the weather or whatever. And then the small print is, we own it and it's ours for free. And do you think that sort of people, journalist, photographer, and everyone's got a phone or a camera or a device that can take really good quality pictures nowadays. Do you think that's affected the sort of professional photographers and how they work? Or
I mean, you mean the kind of citizen kind of photographer side of things? Yes and no. Just, I mean, as you say, everyone's got access to, you know, really powerful cameras in their pockets, but that doesn't necessarily make you a photographer. And I think
no, but like, for example, a lot of websites, it doesn't matter.
Yeah,
because it's fleeting.
Yeah, but I think that's more to do with the current state and the current world that we live in, and our kind of consciousness in terms of the number of images that we see and look through. It's just disposable.
So, for example, now, ladies and gentlemen, this is a magazine
available in all good news agents.
But you know, for any photographer, it's still important and a highlight to have their work.
Yeah.
Even like
Published
50 years later, you know, using
yeah.
pictures on the cover, and you know, I think it's still it's wonderful to see.
Yeah,
print.
and there, you know, fingers crossed there will always be a place for published work. But I think we're in the time where images are pretty much disposable, you know, and people's consciousness and concentration on looking at a photo is really diminished just because of the nature of how they're consuming them, you know, be it on a mobile phone or that.
Well, like here, for example, now we're back to a Sunday Times magazine cover of Tyson Fury. It's actually quite a striking image. You see him all over the place.
Yeah.
But that's kind of a standout.
Yeah, this was shot actually while his family were on holiday in Disney in the States. So it was a kind of a real last-minute job. And he, you know, bless him, he kind of put the time aside to do the shoot while the family were on holiday over there. So I was thinking, that was Girian Blask, kind of over to photograph him. It was down in Orlando. And I don't know if we've got the other image. Yeah. So, I mean, this is one of those situations
where...
Who
asked him to do that?
The photographer did. Yeah. So just on a whim and an off chance, and, you know, more him than me, ask him, you know, one of the hardest men in the world if they put on some Mickey Mouse ears. But hats off to him. And it goes back to that whole thing of you never know unless you ask.
Yeah.
But, you know, you can guarantee 9 times out of 10 if
a publicist would say no.
if that idea was put in front of the publicist, they'd say no. But, you know, by asking him on the day, you know, the photographer forms that bond and relationship between the sitter. And if they gain their trust, then they can either say yes or no.
Yeah.
And luckily, you know, he said yes in that instance.
Great. So how much input, like, you get, say, the magazine says we're photographing Tyson Fury or Robert De Niro, how much of the decision making, choosing the photographer, is down to you? How much?
All of it.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of beauty about the gravitas.
Don't drive him mad now, people, with your shitty Instagram pictures.
No, it's there's. I say this quite a lot. The kind of picture editors are kind of creatures of habit in terms of we use kind of the same photographers or a lot of the same photographers all the time. But that's mainly because, especially working on a weekly magazine, you just haven't got the time to A, see that many different photographers, B, kind of nurture them to create what you want to get and kind of hold their hand through the kind of shooting process.
There's risk involved in using someone new.
Yeah, precisely. So, and ultimately that's down to me as the commissioning editor, that if they don't come back with the goods, then, you know, it's obviously, you know, it's their fuck up, but it's also mine because I'm the one that's commissioned that. So that's why kind of I use a number of kind of regular photographers, but also because I can't be there in a lot of circumstances, especially, you know, with a weekly magazine. So I know that I can send, you know, Girian to Orlando to do something, and he will come back with something like that. Yeah. Or, you know, I can send someone across to, you know, the other side of the world to photograph someone, and they will get what I want without me having to, you know, draw it out for them and everything.
Yeah.
And on the flip side of that, from a photographer's point of view, that freedom is kind of why you do editorial work.
Yeah.
because you're not confined to the restrictions that you might do, say, for example, when you're shooting an advertising campaign or commercial work where it has to be a certain way.
Drawn out.
Yeah, so you're using your creativity as a photographer to make brilliant images, and that's what 99% of them want to do.
And then we have David Bailey.
Yeah, yeah. So for me, this is kind of an amazing point in my career. That this is when I was at Q, and I think it was the first time that Bailey and him had been together prior to since shooting, the famous shoot that he did with Lennon. So, it was being with two massive icons from the 60s, really. So David Bailey and Paul McCartney. And just, again, not going with any kind of preconceptual idea, just two people getting on and, doing what they do best.
And how much of the shoot was Bailey talking and how much was
probably
him taking
99.9%.
Yeah.
And then,
Did you get any
1%.
abuse?
Of course, yeah.
Fantastic.
If he remembers who you are, yeah. Yeah, bless him.
I called his studio once. I used to just call up and try and license pictures. And one time I called up and he answered. And he went, "What do you want, cunt?"
Yeah.
And I was like, "I didn't want to speak to you." And he went, "What are you ringing my fucking phone for?" I was like, "Someone helpful normally answers." And like, embarrassingly, it was Smash Hits were doing a Take That special.
Right.
Because they got back together and they owned all the pictures except for one session he'd done for Q.
Right, that was a shoot.
And I was like, "I need to, you shot Take That." "Oh, they never heard of it."
Yeah.
I said, "Well, you shot them for Q, I want to use them."
Yeah.
And he went, "How much?" I said, 1,000. He went, "Each?" I went, "Don't be a cunt." And he went, "I like you."
Exactly, you can.
He said, "Is the paper shit?" I said, "What are we calling shit?" He said, "The Radio Times is shit." I said, "It's not that shit." And he said, don't stitch me up and send me a copy." When it came out, I thought, I can't send him a copy because it's shit.
Yeah.
And all these things we'd done on the Beatles, the Stones, at the National Gallery, always said no. And I get a call about a month later from the assistant. She went, "Bailey's seen the Smash Hit special in W.H. Smith's." I went, "Oh, I'm sorry about that." She went, "No, he loves it. Can you send us 15 copies?"
It was always. I worked a lot with him when I was at GQ as well. He shot a lot of people for me then.
Because he did quite a bit for Q.
Yeah,
there was a period where he just was doing a load of covers.
He shot two really iconic. It was pre-me, but he shot two really iconic covers of the Gallagher brothers, which were amazing covers. And
then he did Damon as well. And
yeah. So he did some really, really good kind of music stuff, or music people.
And that was probably him doing it more for the fun of it than for
I think so, yeah.
Than the Q budget would allow.
Precisely, yeah. But I mean, going to his studios, it's amazing. It's like an assault on the senses. You go in and it's, you're walking through. It's in this little muse house, and you can smell the developer and that in the dark room. You go upstairs, and it's all wooden floors, beautiful kind of muse house with a skylight and everything. It's kind of and there's stool sitting there. It's kind of as you'd expect to walk in something 60 years ago.
You'd had another shoot with McCartney at his office, didn't you? I remember you telling me when you asked, could you touch his Beatle bass?
Yeah, exactly. So he had a handler for his bass. I remember that. And this was at his kind of office in Golden Square, I think, or Soho Square. Yeah, and turned up to kind of photograph him. And of course, you have to jump through hoops to even get to the point to do that. And there's a certain amount of time. And turned up, and there's some other guy there that was holding, the guitar case, and takes out his, is it Hofner bass, and you're not allowed to touch it. Only Sir Paul can touch it. That was an experience in itself as well. But he's a nice guy at the end of the day. This is a really good example about relying on photographers to kind of go above and beyond.
So this is Alex Lake and
Brian Cox
with a model of the space shuttle taking off.
Yeah, and this was shot for Q, but we were doing an interview with Brian. I think it was about his record collection or something like that. I can't remember at the time, but obviously he used to be in. Was it D-Ream?
Yeah. Was it that? Yeah, it was.
It was one of those bands.
It's a Labour song.
Yeah. So he kind of had that musical connection, but we kind of tried to think of various different concepts to do him, because he's famous for being really kind of brainy scientist, and also kind of his expertise about space and so commissioned Alex to kind of shoot it, and thought about having a model rocket or something like that. And Alex went out. Bear in mind, this is kind of the night before the shoot. Went out, bought this Airfix kind of model kit of the space shuttle, and anyone that I show this picture to, they're like, "Oh, it's amazing CGI work." All of that is shot in camera, and what it is, it's genius. It's cotton wool that he's created a kind of cage. Put this cotton wool around it, spray painted all of the kind of darker and lighter areas, and then by putting a light underneath it, it just brings it to life and looks like it's actually taken off. But that's a prime example of a photographer kind of using their creativity and going above and beyond.
Alex Lake always goes above and beyond.
Yeah, he's one of those photographers that will always surprise you with what someone can come up with at the last minute, and being put in any shit situation. Yeah. Be it,
I think Alex
a broom cupboard or
started to take issue with always getting the shit jobs that he made look magnificent.
Exactly,
but because he made them magnificent,
that's why so it's a kind
people in hotel rooms.
It's an ongoing thing.
What's funny about this is we did a shoot with Alex and Ricky Gervais.
Yeah.
Who was being a little, for the same feature, I think Cash for Questions or something like that, where there's usually some sort of concept and it had all gone, there was a misunderstanding. But anyway, we had a priest costume for Ricky, and that was it, and nothing else. And while he was moaning about photographers and Photoshop and it's all fake and nothing's real, he opened Alex's portfolio at that picture and he went, "See, there you go, like it's all fake, it's all Photoshop." And Alex went, "I made that out of cotton wool." And he shut up. It was brilliant. It was perfect.
Yeah.
I mean, it actually does look Photoshopped. It's just...
It does, and
it's real.
There's so many times where photographers like Alex have kind of got you out of the shit because, you have no time, no space, no kind of preconceived kind of idea about what you're going to do with someone, and then suddenly you get something back and it's wow. And that's why they make their names for themselves. Again, I know you had Peru kind of previous,
who actually spoke about this
which is kind of half of why I wanted to chat about it as well. Is this was he had been on I'm a Celebrity, Come Out of the Jungle, but insisted that we photographed him at this restaurant where he was going to be doing the interview. So I was like, well,
he wanted to be photographed.
That was kind of the kind of the only place that we could do it, and only have certain amount of time to do it. So it had to be shot at this restaurant that he frequented. So my initial thought was, what we're going to do with him in a restaurant, because it's so out of so removed from what he's about. But then realised that he had been on I'm a Celebrity, so I said to Prue, "Can you get some worms or some fake crickets and stuff like that, so we can have him as though he's kind of doing a bush tucker trail challenge," which he did. But then there were various different images of him, with worms hanging out his mouth or a plate of worms and stuff. But then Peru had this eyeball.
Peru would have an eyeball.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, probably popped one of his own out, and popped it on the plate. And this was going back to what you're saying. This is a prime example of the photograph dictating the headline. So obviously, politician-wise, the eyes have it. It harks back to what happens in Parliament with the voting system and everything. But that's another example of a photographer using their kind of intuition and using their kind of creativity to be able to come up with something. We knew we had to shoot him there, but
Making the best of it.
Yeah, making the best of a fairly shit situation. But also the amount of crap that he got, and I got messages as well, and I think there were comments on putting him on the front cover of the magazine. But ultimately, as a photographer, I think Peru said this, he's not there to make his own political comment on the subject that he's photographing. Yeah. He's there commissioned by be it a magazine, newspaper, or whoever to do the job. So he's there for one reason only, and that's to get an amazing image. So you have loads of photographers saying, why do you shoot that dickhead? Why are you doing that?
But it's the same as photographing a band whose music you hate.
But yeah, precisely. But also at the same time, if you could travel back in time, and I've said this, people take it to heart, but if you could have taken a portrait of Hitler, or if you could have taken a portrait of Michael Jackson, those same photographers probably would have jumped at the chance of doing that, and to have something like that, be known to have an iconic image. So my message, I think, from that is, if you get the opportunity to photograph someone that you don't agree with or have very strong opinions about, just put your opinions aside and create an image, because you can do some great things, and it can be, become an iconic shot.
Yeah. Well, I think we've come to the end of our ramble. Anything you'd like to add? Oh, so something, I know you probably get it all the time with photographers looking for work or wanting advice, but I know it's an awful question, but...
You want a job?
I want a job. I've got a camera. I take pictures of people's feet, though. Yeah. Really, that's what I was, on all these Q shoots. I predominantly worked on archive projects with photographers from the 60s or 70s. And when we were doing their books or getting to the end of it, I'd say, are there any pictures of you, at work?
Yeah.
And it'd be like, who would do that?
Yeah.
Because they were the photographer. There wasn't a spare photographer.
Yeah, exactly.
And I thought it's a real shame that some photographers who'd worked with a band for 10 years, there's no document
of them doing it.
So I started taking pictures of, I've got hundreds of pictures of Alex, crouched over.
the back of his head.
And I would try and obscure the person he's taking pictures of. And then I just kind of, took it a step further and take a few more pictures.
Yeah.
I'm not looking for a job. I'm unemployable. But but yeah, so how do you deal with, you must get a lot of people, and I think you touched on it before, there's just not the time to look at everything.
Yeah, but also a lot of people need to kind of do their homework before they approach editors and picture editors. The main one for me is, we do a shoot, a great cover or whatever, and then I'll get emails off the back of that from someone saying, I really love that shoot, can I come and see you in my portfolio? And it's pretty much the same type of work than what we've already done, in terms of style or that. And so why would I commission someone? Why would I add someone else to my roster
that already does that?
When I've already got someone doing that?
But what space have you got for looking for something different? I mean, are you limited by what? But what I like, just looking at the magazine, so that's, a couple of weeks ago, and that's, so they've got two very different style of cover.
That's the beauty.
So you're not particularly tied.
No. I mean, there's definitely a kind of photographic aesthetic that I like within the kind of portraitist side of stuff, that I kind of, to keep a thread going and to keep the look of the magazine a certain way. I don't really go in for, hard flash photography or anything that's kind of too fashiony. It's very, very traditional portraiture, I like to kind of call it. So that's from a portrait side of things, that's what I'm really interested in. There's also the flip side of that side of my job. There's the photojournalism side of things, commissioning photographers going up to, war zones or doing documentary projects and photographing different features and things. So there are two kind of, I mean, some photographers can do both and can do both very, very well. But they're the kind of two main areas that I commission. So there's the celebrity portraiture or the standard kind of portraiture, and then the documentary or photojournalism side. Unless it's going to be something that really kind of wows me, or unless someone can bring something different to the table, then it's just a waste of time on both sides, on both parts, because I've already got an established roster of people who I can trust and who I've worked with over a number of years that I know I can send out without holding their hand, that will come back with the goods. But on the flip side of that, if someone does something really interesting and something different to what we do, then I would take notice.
I had a photographer asked me how they're going to get a chance at Q, and I said, if one of the others dies, give me a call.
But that's the thing. A lot of people, to them, work their way up. Have worked their way up in their career from being a local newspaper photographer to assisting, other photographers, to then shooting various different features, to then, in a photographer's view, being given the holy grail of photographing a cover. And I don't know whether it's education or just a sign of the times, but you've got people that haven't taken that path, that just come in straight away wanting to be commissioned to photograph a cover.
Just graduated, I'd love to shoot covers.
I mean,
I said yes.
Yeah.
Never called them back.
I mean, hats off to them for having the balls to do it. But it's a bit of a kick in the teeth as well to those people who've worked so hard and gone down the path of building up to achieving that, to get someone in that has never done it. I mean, I wouldn't commission someone that has never photographed a cover or has never shot a celebrity, put them in front of a celebrity, and you just wouldn't do that. So
all right. Yeah. And you're still enjoying it?
I do. I genuinely do love it. Yeah, it's and weirdly, the Sunday Times magazine's where I kind of always wanted to be.
Dream job.
Yeah, and it's just, for me, it's great, the variety of subjects that we focus on, and doing the magazine is perfect. It's perfect balance. It's not too fashion focused, not too music focused, not too it's a whole kind of gamut of photography, and the archival side is so amazing. So yeah, I'm still enjoying it. It's a challenge as ever with everything. Budgets never get bigger, always get smaller, but that's about the great people that you work with that can understand that and will work around it, and are invested in creating something great.
Cool. Well, Russ O'Connell, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.